Greetings everyone, this is Patrick from Patrick Comtes Photography. Wanted to do another little tutorial real quick here on a question that I've been getting on a recent picture I posted to Instagram, and here's the picture. This is a picture of the inside of St. Paul's Cathedral in Chicago, and I believe it's a Presbyterian church, but anyway, it was open. We were there on vacation, had my camera, can't resist going in and shooting a good cathedral or church. So I set up my gear, got all the settings the way that I wanted, checked to make sure I wasn't blowing out highlights or anything like that where it was important. Took some snapshots, and this was the end result. A lot of the people were asking how I finished this particular photograph. And I will admit that a lot of what we see here in the picture has been altered a little bit, specifically the lighting. And I used a technique called dodge and burn, which has been around forever in photography. But that's a technique that can take your ordinary pictures to a higher level, if you will, a little bit more finished or polished look. So I wanted to show you how I got to that end result. So this is actually the untouched photo of the cathedral, and it doesn't have any of the post-processing things explained. You can see it's a decent picture as far as exposure. I like where that's at because that is kind of how I remember seeing it with my eye, but there are some issues where I think I can bring out a little more detail in this photograph in some areas that might be a tad bright. Keep in mind, unless you do bracketing, and I didn't in this particular instance, I just took I took 3 shots, but they were all the same exposure. They weren't under and over, and I didn't combine any of those. In retrospect, I may have done that if I was there again, but this is what I came back with because my time was limited. So there's some issues. The ceiling up here is a little bit dark. Some of the windows, look like they may be blown out a little bit. I think the altar area is a little bit bright, and these stained glass windows had a little bit of light shining through, and they're a little bit dark. So keep in mind the camera's going to survey the overall scene, and it's just going to make its best assessment on whether it's going to have to brighten the photo or underexpose the photo because it's overblown. So in this particular instance, I think it did a decent job of rendering things, but there's a couple things that I want to change because I don't remember the ceiling being that dark or the behind the altar being that dark or whatnot. So here's how I kind of finished this particular picture. The first thing I did was I looked at exposure, and like I said, I kind of like the exposure where it's at, even though some areas of the photograph are a little bit bright and some areas are a little bit dark. I think it did a decent job, so I'm going to leave the exposure alone. Then I'm going to look at the color, basically over here in the develop panel. I'm just going to go to HSL in color. And is there anything that I want to kind of bring out? Well, I could add a little bit more orange to make the wood look a little bit more up to date, and you can see it kind of makes some changes in the ceilings too. And I could play around with the rest of the colors to get some of that to come out the stained glass, but I'm going to come back to that. And then once I look at that, basically what I do is I do the technique called dodge and burn. And I do that by clicking here in the masking icon, and it opens up the masking panel. In the masking panel, what I like to use quite a bit is the brush. Sometimes the linear gradient if I've got to take a picture and I want to bring down like the foreground or something like that. But for dodge and burn, radial gradient is where I like to go. So I'm going to click on radial gradient, and when you do that, you're going to draw out a little bit of a circle to whatever size that you would like. I'm going to kind of get this altar above there a little bit brighter, the way that I kind of like that. And I'm going to move this up a tad just so that it kind of does that, and it looks like it's kind of shining up. And then I'm going to come over here to the exposure tab, and you can see how that kind of gives you the effect that that overall area is a little bit more lit. Now, you can always alter that by coming back here, and if you've got the mask turned on for colors, and you can choose your color mask too. I just happen to choose red, that's fine. But I'm going to leave that here, and I like how that kind of lights up that part of the altar now, so I'm going to leave that. There are a couple other issues. I think the ceiling up here, again, like I mentioned, is too dark, so I'm actually going to detach this panel here, kind of bring this over if I could, and then create a new, and you can rename these too. I hate to jump around like that on you, but if you wanted to rename this, you could just click here, click rename. We'll just call this altar, and then click OK. So we know what's what if we ever have to go back. We're going to create a new mask. Again, I'm going to choose radial gradient. I'm going to drag that out. We're going to put that up here and kind of get that ceiling area, you know, a little bit brighter. And again, I'm going to come over to exposure and just open that up. And you can see how that kind of gets some of those highlights into that ceiling and things like that. And you can move this around and put that, you know, wherever you wish based on taste and things like that. So I kind of like that. Another problem area that I see is the stained glass windows on the side. They're a little bit blown out. So again, I'm not going to rename these for you and waste your time on that, but you could rename this ceiling if you wanted to. I'm going to create another new mask. We're going to come to radial gradient, and we're going to draw this one out. And I'm going to make this one kind of long and thin, and I want to make sure, and you can see how my cursor changes, so I can rotate this to where I want it. And I'm going to put this right over the window, and I think what I'm going to do is bring the exposure down a little bit, just to get a little more detail in there. Now, that mask that I just created, if you click on these three dots right next to the little eye icon there, you can see duplicate mask. Rather than draw another one out, I'm just going to copy this one. I'm going to bring it over to the other side, just so the settings are roughly the same for each window, and it gives it a little bit of a uniformity look. And I kind of like that a little bit better. Now, another problem area that I see in this picture right away is the light is coming from the left side of the frame, and you can see that it's coming through these windows on there. But it's got a relative bluish tint to it. So I'm not a big fan of that. I'm going to click on the masking icon again, which is going to close that window, and I'm going to go to color yet again, and I'm going to come down to the blue. And I'm just going to drag that slider, and you can see how the blue that's in the picture, I hope you can see that on your computer screens, gets a little bit more natural looking. I like that versus the bluish tint. Now, another issue that I see, and I'm going to go back to the masking panel, and you can see that all the masks that we just did are still there. We haven't renamed all of them yet, but they're still there. I want to balance this photo. The left side of the frame looks a little bit brighter than the right side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new mask, and this time I'm going to grab my brush, and you can use your brush at whatever size that you would like, and the right and left bracket keys that are just below backspace and to the right of the letter P on a standard keyboard, both Macintosh and Windows keyboards, you can raise or lower the size of the brush, make it bigger, make it smaller. So I'm basically going to make this a little bit bigger, and I just want to come in here and paint a little bit. Try not to get the lights or anything like that. Just a rough little one to kind of bring down these highlights a little bit to try to better balance the frame here. So I'm going to kind of color that in, and you can see where it's red, that's where I'm coloring. When there is no red, that's where I'm not coloring. I might make this a little bit smaller and kind of come up here in the pillar a little bit as well, just to kind of do that. Now, I don't need to be exact. I just want it to kind of match a little bit better. And then I'm going to come over here to exposure, and I'm just going to lower that exposure a little bit, just to kind of better balance the right and the left side on that. I kind of like that. Another thing that I would do is I think the altar is too bright as compared, because I really want this area to stand out with the stained glass. So I'm going to create another new mask, grab radial gradient yet again, and drag out this particular circle here. And I'm going to lower the exposure on that a little bit. Maybe make this a tad bigger, just so it gets all of it. Yeah, I like that better. So now the altar here is a little bit brighter, the stained glass above the altar, I should say. If you ever want to come back to a mask, you can either just click on it, or you can hit this little pin in the middle to double click and it'll take you back there. I think I want to add a little bit more brightness to that. Yeah, that looks better to me. Now, another thing that I want to do to finish this particular photograph is maybe highlight these lights a little bit. So I'm going to create another radial gradient, drag this out so it covers the light on there. And I'm just going to bring up the exposure just a tad to make it look like they're a tad brighter. And again, I'm going to duplicate this mask number 5 so that it copies it. I can bring that over here and rotate that so that it gets, again, most of the light. And it's already brought up. So now I've got these two lights right in the very front and center on there. So I might do a few more adjustments on here with the brush, where I can basically do, just brighten the exposure a little bit here in the beams. Add just to get a little bit more detail out of that beautiful brick and things like that. Another couple of areas that I think are a little bit underexposed would be up here in the beams. I know that I already have a mask there, but I'm thinking that's a little bit dark. And then these areas over here. So I'm going to create another radial gradient mask. And you can create as many of these as you want. You can resize them. You can put them where you want. Very versatile tool for dodging and burning. Now, you can dodge and burn in Photoshop too. That's a whole nother tutorial, but you can definitely dodge and burn in Photoshop too. In fact, they have a tool that's dedicated to just dodge and burn. So what I did is I just duplicated that mask again and I brought it over to the other side just to kind of balance out that photo. It still looks, interestingly enough, a little bit bright to me where I did the brush. So let's see if I can maybe get a little bit more of that brush in here and just work on that particular mask. Whoops, I didn't mean to rename that. I just wanted to bring down that exposure a little bit more and perhaps alter that. Whoops, I didn't want to move that, so we'll Control Z because that's a major faux pas right there, right? And just make that a little bit darker. Yeah, there we go. So that looks a little bit better. So I like how that kind of balances out the entire photograph there. There's more that you could do if you wish, but this is very similar to the way that I had that photograph when it was finished. If I come back here and I open this one up, this one looks probably a little bit darker on the screen, but that's because it's already been photo processed. But when I go back to the Lightroom one, this could be the potential final product right here as you see that on the screen. So it looks very similar, but you get the idea with the dodge and burn. You've got to use this a little judiciously because if you go overboard, it could look a little artificial. So you've got to be subtle with it. But it's a great tool that you can have in your toolbox to be able to, make this a little bit of a more finished rendition of what your eye was seeing. Because again, the camera doesn't really do a good job of capturing what your eye sees. Your eye can see 14 stops and the camera can only see 6, maybe 7, depending on what model of camera you have. So we're going to create another mask because now it's bugging me that I've talked about it. And I'm going to basically lower this down, this capacity. I'm going to rotate this a little bit if I can get this to change. There we go. Maybe make this area, a little bit darker so that it's a little bit better. Do I like that or not? I don't know. I might delete that mask. I'm not a big fan of that one. If you want to delete the mask, you just click on those 3 little dots, delete mask 8, and it goes right back to your initial startup on there. So I'm going to end this video right now because you get the idea of the dodge and burn. And again, I'm using Adobe Lightroom CC. You could certainly use Photoshop for this if you wanted to. And I believe this is also available in Lightroom Mobile. So a lot of versatility, very strong tool to kind of put a personalized touch on your photographs. I hope you guys enjoyed this little video, and you can use this to your heart's content on your photos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.